Hello and welcome to a new series that I'm going to create and record over the next probably weeks and months. And this series is about programming the FMCs of various add-ons in 3 simulators: Explain, Prepared and MSFS. Maybe not only FMCs like in classical Boeing and Airbus, but I might also add things like a G1000 or G3000 or even a GNS Garmin device. And potentially I was also thinking about doing something about the SIVA INS, for which we have a version in Explain and also, yeah, it's in Explain, exactly. Yeah, I don't think we have it anywhere else at the moment. So the way this works is that I have a prepared flight plan, and I'm going to show you the flight plan, how I set it up. The idea is that we are on the departure airport at our stand. We have prepared the aircraft, put the electricity on, APU or ground power, and we are now ready to do the FMC part, programming with the CDU or the data entry unit or whatever it's called. And yeah, I'm going to guide you through what you need to do for each of these. So the first thing I'm going to show you is the flight plan that I will use for all of these. I used little nav map to create the flight plan, and you can see that we are flying from Berlin-Brandenburg Airport, Echo Delta Delta Bravo, to Frankfurt, Echo Delta Delta Foxtrot, and I've completely planned the route. So to be a bit more detailed, so we're flying from runway 25 left, that's the southern runway in Berlin, to via the Lokdo 1 November departure to a waypoint called Lokdo. From there we take several airways, the Zulu 20, Mike 736 and the Zulu 94, until we reach Pilam. From Pilam we go to Kerax. Kerax is the initial waypoint for the Kerax to Golf arrival, and when we arrive we go into the Redco or metro transition. That's something that we're going to decide or set up while we are programming the FMC near the top of descent, once we know where we're going to land. In this case, I've assumed that we are going to land on runway 25 center in Frankfurt. It's the center runway facing west. Yeah, and all that we are going to prepare so that we can then, when we're finished, start with all the before start items and get the airplane ready to push back and start taxiing to the runway. So that's the idea. Each of these FMCs has their own specialities and special features, or it doesn't have certain features. That's the other combination. We'll see today one that it doesn't have much features, but it is the default standard FMC from Explain. In many aircraft you will have the possibility to bring out the FMC either as a window like in Explain here. In the cases where you cannot externalize the actual FMC window, I will probably be using things like WebFMC or AviaWorks or some other method in MSFS to bring up the CDU, the data entry unit, and bring all that, arrange all that on the screen as you see it here. We are also going to look at the CDUs because many of them are pretty similar, but yeah, there are certain sections. The commonalities are you usually have a display here. You do have so-called line select keys, the left and the right ones. They are associated with the lines here on the display, and usually you kind of separate the screen in half, so the left half and everything that's written here in a line is covered by the left line select key, and everything that's on the right side is covered by the right line select keys. Then you do have the keyboard part, which is basically numbers, some special characters, and the letters, a delete key usually, or something like a clear key. Also a slash. The slash is mainly used in Airbuses, for example. And then you have a number of page or not navigation, page keys, maybe you could call them, because each of these bring you to a particular page here in your entry unit. You can see that here. Okay, progress page, fixed page, RAD NAV page. Usually we also have at least a previous and next. Previous and next is relevant when you have a multi-page thing like the ACT aircraft VNAV climb. And here you could go forward and backward. We also very often, especially in Boeing aircraft, have the exec key. Airbus works slightly different, but yeah, there's always some way of activating changes to your flight plan. Okay. So, and when you look down here, I actually also converted or copied the same flight plan in the format that you would often see in tools like SimBrief. SimBrief would actually represent the flight plan similar to what you see here. So it's Echo Delta Delta Bravo flying to Echo Delta Delta Foxtrot. This here is a special thing. It basically tells us that our ground speed, it has been calculated with 442 knots, and the flight level that this flight plan contains is flight level 180. It's not a waypoint, so you can't use it for the lateral navigation. Lokdo 1 November is our departure route via Lokdo, and then comes an airway, an endpoint of an airway, another endpoint, a third airway, and another endpoint. Here we have the arrival procedure, Kerak 2 Golf, Kerax 2 Golf, and yeah, that's it. So this is another way of how flight plans are represented. This is the sort of exploded one, so the detailed one, and yeah, tools like Navigraph charts. If you have that here, you see your flight plan as well with the individual waypoints also on the airways. I also will show you some of the maps, the charts that I use here for doing flights, and how you use them to kind of help you with the programming of your FMC. Okay, now let's start with setting up the flight in a default aircraft from Lamina Research, which is the MD-80, or is it an MD-82? I'm not quite sure. It's definitely the basic standard MD-80 that comes with X-Plane, and it also comes with the standard X-Plane FMC. And what you see here is the representation of the FMC in when you bring it out, but inside the aircraft itself, these default FMC might look slightly different because they kind of adapted to the aircraft that they modeled. So, for example, the MD-80's version of the default FMC looks like this. Actually, very nicely done. It looks like a CRT, a cathode ray tube here. But you can see, usually with the colors, yeah, so when you see this blue and white thing, you know that you're most likely in a default FMC from X-Plane. In the Boeing 747, this has different color. This is kind of the beige, brownish version. And in the 737, in the default 737-800, it's also gray, but has a slightly different layout. But ultimately, it's the same displays, and basically all the keys that you can see in the version that I show you here on the screen, they are also there in the modeled 3D virtual cockpit versions of the FMC. It's the same functionality, just looks different from time to time. What I also show you on the top right of the video here is the display, the navigation display. For example, this one here is the one from the MD-80. As you will see when we start entering the waypoints, this display is pretty useless because the writing is extremely small. It's not very crisp, and the way that the flight plan is depicted is very marginal, and sometimes there are really strange things being drawn on the screen. Unfortunately, this is one of the weaknesses of this system. It's okay, you get your flight plan and it will fly it properly if you set it up properly, but the display, the representation, the visual representation is unfortunately not very good, but I still keep this display up there at the right top so that you can also see how things change when we start entering waypoints. I'm here in plan mode, as it's called. Okay, so let's start going through the FMC. One thing I can tell you already is the default laminar FMC does not heat the aircraft it's built into. So the laminar FMC is not aware that we are in an MD-80. It would also not be aware if we are in the default laminar 747. Okay, it doesn't care. There are no aircraft-specific settings like you would do in other add-ons, in payware add-ons, or in the likes of Zibo, where the aircraft, the weights, fuel, the engine power, the rate at which fuel will be consumed by the aircraft, all of that will be used as it is in real life by the flight management computer to calculate, for example, how much fuel you will have left when you arrive at your destination airport. All of that does not exist with the default FMC. The only thing you get with this thing is lateral navigation from waypoint to waypoint that you set up, that I'll show you here, and a restricted aspect of the vertical navigation, which is basically it can calculate the top of descent, but it calculates it based on very simple parameters. I will show you that a bit later. So let's assume we're now sitting here. The captain starts, fires up the aircraft, batteries, APU, ground power, and all that is set. And we're at the point where we start programming the FMC. First thing we normally do is go to the status page. It's called also init or index. Depends a little bit. World nav data. So I have here the X-Plane World Edition, which is the whole world. There were actually editions with only Europe, I think, or the US. I have the global version, the database, the ERAC. I use Navigraph to update X-Plane. It is on 16th of June, which is over in 2 days. So in 2 days I need to get another ERAC to update, but at the moment it's still valid. You can see the simulator time. It's 0535 UTC, which is 7:35 simulated time here in Germany on the 2nd of June. It's XP11 1155 R2, which is the last release of XP11 11 as far as I understood. Okay, you could then go to the database part here. You could enter the name of a waypoint, and I think it looks it up in the database. I've never used this to be honest. What this waypoint list, I guess these are custom waypoints that they would list here, I'm assuming, because you can go to define waypoint and then you could actually set up your own waypoint that it will store somewhere. I'm not sure where exactly XP11 stores this, but it is actually persisted somewhere on the hard drive when you use the store waypoint. Again, never used that, and it's not something that we are going to need for a standard way of setting up flights that we do as simmers usually. There's also this arrival data page. I'm not sure what's going to be there. Again, I never use this page, but what I use is the route menu, because you have two ways of setting up your flight plan. You could use a tool like Little Nav Map, as I did, or SimBrief or SimToolkit Pro with the help of SimBrief, and you can set up a flight plan that you can store in an FMS file, which is the XP11 version of the route files that we have in the likes of FSX and Prepared. And you can then load this directly into the FMC, saving you the individual setting up of the waypoints and the airways and all that. You go to the company route list, and then you just look for the flight that you've saved. You have to put the stuff in the XP11 folder, under the XP11 folder, output FMS plans, I think it's called. Yeah, FMS plans, it's the folder. In there you have these files. For example, I have an EDDB-EDDF. That is what I created with Little Nav Map. Not going to use this now because I wanted to set it up from scratch with you. Okay. So let's go back to index, because what we do now is we go to the flight plan, the F-plan page, and that's where we start. First, I give the departure airport at origin here. Then I enter the arrival airport at destination. And you can already see that on the display we start seeing a line. Now we do not have a very high zoom. So what I can do is I can bring this to the maximum distance here, and yeah, it's not enough. It's obviously not enough to see the whole flight plan, or what? Let me see. Nope. Ah well, we leave it like this for the moment. How many miles is this? It's 200 and something miles. I would have expected to see something, but maybe it's just too early yet. So let's continue and see what happens. You can give the flight number, something like DLH99 or whatever. This is not mandatory, but when you put the flight number in, that's the first time when the execute light comes on. I usually, well, very often I just press the exec button when the light comes on, after I made a change, because only when you press the exec button is the change really persisted in the flight plan. If you forget that, you may make changes, but they get lost. Now, depending on which FMC you're on, sometimes you have the first line of your flight plan on the first page, like it is here. In most Boeing FMCs, if I remember correctly, you usually have to go to the next page in order to start entering the flight plan. Since we haven't yet got the first line filled, it's not possible to go to the next page. So as soon as we put something in here, you will see that the second page comes. active. Now looking at the flight plan here, so when we go to a little nav map, so we've specified our departure airport now, or our origin, and we have runway 25 left. That's just my decision that we're going to take off from the southern runway. And the first thing I can do now is to enter the departure routing. Now here it depends a little bit on what time you start with setting up your FMC. If you fly on VATSIM or IVAO and you haven't yet got the ATIS and you don't know the information, usually this waypoint here is the first waypoint of the en route part that you get from your planning system, like here, okay, logged off. So if you don't know yet which runway to be used, I mean, there is a lot of things that you can do to kind of guess what's happening. So for example, depending on the wind, usually you can already tell whether in Berlin you take off towards the east or the west, okay? I decided that we have wind that makes us take off towards the west. But it could well be that you are at the airport and you're not yet sure. So what you could do is you go and put Logdo as a direct waypoint. By the way, left side always either a procedure, like a departure arrival procedure, or an airway. So you usually enter airways. You can, I think, also give the departure or arrival procedure here, but usually use this to enter the name of the airway. And this is, I call that the exit point of your procedure. And an airway is, yeah, it's a bit like a procedure too. So when you have an airway or a procedure, you always have an exit point for that procedure. And in this case, it's Logdo. So what you could do, as long as you don't know what runway you're taking off from, you could put in Logdo direct here. So I could now enter Logdo directly here. The waypoint would be here, and I could continue with setting up the en route part. That's one possibility. The other, if you have already listened to ATC and you know it's Logdo 1 November, so you got your clearance and it clearly says Logdo 1 November is our departure, then you could go to the departure arrival page already here, press DEP for departure, and select the runway that has been assigned, 25 left. And here you can see the Logdo 1 November. That's the one that has been assigned. You select that one, press exec, and now we can already see that our flight plan, when you look at the display, I know you cannot read the labels. I have difficulties reading the labels, even in this large display. But it has already set up your departure routing. Your initial departure routing is already visible. And that's, by the way, here, okay? So this is what we have set up now. That's, by the way, the Logdo 1 November. Yeah, that's the Logdo 1 November departure, runway 25 left, maximum 250 knots below flight level 100, or as by ATC, not applicable within airspace C, okay? And yeah, so. And you can see that the routing is pretty correct. It's DB260, DB263, Lulul, Ezika, Logdo. Let's check this. Runway 25 left, DB260, DB263, Lulul, Ezika, Logdo. So that's the first part of our flight plan. If I go here now, I can see Logdo 1 November is on the left side, exit point is Logdo, and look, we have now 2 pages. So to continue now entering my flight plan, I go to the second page. And our next waypoint after Logdo is MAC. Now, Magdeburg is on a airway called Zulu 20, but it's only one navigation point that we have on this airway. So you have two options here. You could do the complicated way, enter the airway, and then use MAC as the exit point. But you could also do, and it is basically from the effort, it's the same thing. Instead of using entering the airway and then the MAC, you can directly go to MAC. So you do not have to provide the airway name. You could actually do direct waypoints. And you can do that, by the way, for the whole flight plan. If you decide not to use the airway for entering, you could actually hack in MAC, Barra, Galma, and so on. But it's easier to use the airways if you have them, because the next example, let's first start with this one here. So I do Z20. Put this on the left side, and I enter MAG. Done. Now the next one is already two waypoints. So here it becomes already apparent that if you have longer airways, it saves you having to enter a lot of waypoints. You could mistype, you know, this kind of thing. You always have to watch out when you put in waypoints. Using the airways is usually quicker. Okay, so in this case it's Mike 736. Put that in here, and see, it always comes up with this discontinuity. You have to change this, because discon is not a valid waypoint. If you leave this in like this, on your legs page you will see that you have a problem with your flight plan. So you must always provide the exit point, which is Galma in this case. Always the last one here on the airway. You see this here, by the way, as well, M736, and exit point is Galma. So put this in here. Next is the Zulu 94. And exit point for Zulu 94 is Pilam. So I enter Pilam on the right side. Done. And now what you can do is, Kerax is usually the last waypoint of your en route part, is in very many but not all cases also the entry point to your arrival routing. Not necessarily every time, but very often it is like this. And as with Logdo, very often the name of these two waypoints at the end and at the beginning help you to find the corresponding departure or arrival route. So what I can do now is that I enter Kerax as a direct waypoint, because what I want to do is I would like to go next now and replace it with an arrival route. Why am I doing it like this? Well, it depends a little bit on what your scenario for the flight is. If your flight is completely planned through, like in my case, if you're not flying online, so if you have planned everything and you know exactly what arrival also you're going to use and which runway you're going to land on, you don't need to do Kerax here. What you could do is you go directly to the DEP-R, to the departure arrival page, and you set up your arrival and your approach, the runway and the ILS and all that. That's the one thing. But very often, especially on longer flights, you don't really know what runway will be active at the airport. So usually with this last waypoint of the en route part, you know that it's probably to be a Kerax arrival, but you don't know which one, because it depends a little bit on what runway you're going to land on. There are at least 2 Kerax arrival routes, depending on whether you land from the west or from the south, from the east at Frankfurt. So in this case, you would actually do it like this, and then I learned that many FMCs need the kind of last entry, which is usually the arrival or an approach. So if I don't know yet, what I usually do is I go on the arrival page here, I check my flight plan. Yeah, usually it says already the wind comes, I don't know, from 240. So most likely this is going to be an ILS or something 25. We have 3, we have 25 center, 25 left, 25 right in Frankfurt. So what I could do now is, I'm not going to do this now, but what I usually do then is that I pick the ILS, which is most likely the one that I'm going to have, at least at the moment, as far as I can see. I put this in, but I don't put in an arrival routing, and I don't put in any transitions. Don't do that, just enter the approach and execute that, and it needs it to calculate your flight. There are several implementations of FMCs where you have to do this, otherwise you end up with not calculated flight plans. Okay. In our case, we know that we are going to use the Kerax to Golf arrival and that we are going to land on runway 25 center, ILS. Okay. So what I will do is I will select the ILS 25 center. I am then going to find the Kerax to Golf arrival. Doesn't work, right? Yep. When you do the departure part, you first pick the runway, then you pick your start. But in this FMC, when you're on the standard arrival page, you first select the standard arrival and then you select the runway. So I pick Kerax to Golf, and now it presents me with the available runways and the approaches for these. And in this case, it's ILS 25 center and left. It is not applicable for right. There's probably a different Kerax arrival for that. So I'll pick the ILS 25 center. And now I can choose, I don't have to, but I can choose a transition. Now let's have a look at this and see what we should choose. So let's first go to the Kerax to Golf arrival. It starts here at Kerax. It goes to waypoint GED, Gedan, and then it goes to Metro. And Metro, from Metro, it goes to Orviv. And Orviv is, in this case, is actually the initial approach fix for runways 25 left and center. But as you can see, there is no Orviv transition for the approach. So Orviv is something where ATC will then guide you, and you can see this. It's a little bit difficult to see, but this is actually a dashed line here, and a dashed line, in my understanding, is when ATC is providing you instructions. So flying without ATC, I can not actually use Orviv as a waypoint. Therefore, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the Metro, because we fly to Metro. I use the Metro transition, and I select this here, and then I execute. Now let's have a look at this whole thing and also check whether or not we have discontinuities, meaning holes in your flight plan. So this is the flight plan from the beginning. We start at runway 25 left, and with the step command you can actually step through the flight plan in your display. So you see how now the flight plan kind of moves along in the display. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to read the waypoints. DB263, Lulul, Magdeburg, Barab, Galma, Esika, Weimar, ERF, Okoch, Bamki, Vagab, Pilam, yeah, which is on the next page, but unfortunately it doesn't show that. Kerax, and Gedan. And then comes Metro, this D158i. Metro, by the way, is the so-called initial approach fix, and RADGO, which comes now, is the final approach fix, because at the RADGO, when we look here, hang on, I'll go to the ILS chart. So when we look here, see, here is this dashed line again, but it ends in the nowhere, because from there normally ATC would give you instructions. So it's Metro, we go down this line here via the special D158 waypoint, and then we turn here. We have to be at 4,000 feet, by the way. That's important, because otherwise you will get difficulties catching your glide path. Just remember, in order for most autopilots to catch your glide path in the ILS approach, is to be slightly under or on the glide path when you activate the approach mode of your autopilot. If you are above, meaning the glide path triangle is below the center, chances are that the autopilot will not catch your glide slope. Okay, you may have still lateral as a localizer, but you will not have the vertical guidance. That means you will have to take over and either correct this and get the autopilot then to catch it up by getting on or below the glide slope, not a lot below, obviously. So be precise here, because if you're not on the published altitude, in this case it's 4,000, you can see this here as well. When I go down here, see, here you have RADGO, it's 4,000 feet, and that's when you are at 4,000 feet, your glide slope will be exactly where it needs to be so that the autopilot can catch it. Yeah, so be aware of that. That's the kind of thing that you should not do wrong, because I had so many approaches where I didn't make it because I miscalculated my descent, especially with new aircraft that I don't know, and then I end up doing the kamikaze trying to catch the glide slope again thing, as you know from my videos if you watch them. So that's this transition, and it's nicely in here, and you can see that there's also no OVIF, because we have not used we have not used it. So we actually told it to go from Metro directly down to RADGO, and therefore this is now correct and complete flight plan. But there are still missing information, such as the speed and also the altitude, and that's because we are still lacking some information that we need to require next. So, being here in the flight plan, just to show you again, that's what it looks like, and you can also see how now the Kerak to Golf procedure is here from Gedan, okay, and then we have the Metro transition, that's also a kind of procedure, with the exit at RADGO, and then we have the I-25 center, that's the ILS approach from Metro, with the Metro transition. Now that is a bit weird the way it's displayed here, but that's just the way Lamina has implemented this. It works though, so even if it looks a bit odd, it's actually fine. So in order to set up the vertical aspect of your flight plan, we go to the climb page, and there we start providing some information. The first thing is the transition altitude, which is 5,000 in Germany, 18,000 in the US, for example. And we remember that there is actually a speed restriction. Now, it will not feed the auto throttle or so, because in many of the default aircraft it will not calculate that, but what it will do is it will show you the speed that you should be at, and if one of the aircraft using the default FMC also has a link to the speed in the FMC and, let's say, the auto throttle, you might actually get automatic speed adjustments based on what this thing calculates. But that's not the case in all aircraft. Our climb speed will be 290 or Mach 0.74. Again, this is a default value. So if your aircraft uses the FMC, but that's actually too fast, for example, if you use one of the Coronado turboprops with the default FMC, I'm pretty sure they will not fly 290 on climb, because they probably end up at about 260 max speed or something. So I think the ATR cannot. Can the ATR fly 290? I doubt it. So you need to adjust this, in other words. The same is here, no? Target speed Mach 0.80. Not every aircraft that you will fly with this can fly that fast. You have to find out what your cruise speed should be, and then you can set it here. Again, whether or not the aircraft will follow this depends very much on the implementation. The cruise altitude is important, though. We've been defining that our cruise altitude is flight level 180. You could do 18,000 or use the 180, put it in here. That's actually the most important information. It needs then to calculate your legs. And last but not least, the descent page. You could also navigate here previous and next. Again, we need to calculate the transition flight level. Now, how do you find out what it is? Very simple. Transition altitude is on departure, usually, but not, I think, every time, but in most cases, in Germany, for example, transition altitude is 5,000. There are countries where this could actually be changed by ATC, but usually we have fixed values here. Flying in Germany, for example, it's 5,000. In the US, it's 18,000. In Australia, I think it is, was it 11,000? Can't remember. But it's usually fixed. What's not so fixed and can actually vary in one country as well is the transition level, or transition flight level as it's called here. That's, by the way, what happens at transition altitude. You switch from local QNH settings, baro settings, to the 1013 or 29.92. And when you cross the transition flight level or transition level, you switch from 1013 millibar or 29.92 to the local baro setting again, so that the altitude that you're getting displayed matches with those of other aircraft, and you're not flying, let's say, if flight level 70 or 7,000 feet, if you don't get this right, you might actually think you're on 7,000, but you could be on 6,500, and that is dangerous, because if your altitude isn't matching up with the other aircraft, you might actually get a problem. Or if the instructions on the approach is based on the baro altitude, and you haven't got that right, then your baro altitude will not be the correct one, so you may be too high or too low. So it's important that you get this right, and also set your baro settings. So flight level 50. Now, the transition level, you have to look in the chart. So very often in the charts, let's see with this, yeah, here it is. You see the transition level Here it says by ATC. So if you get a transition level from ATC, it could be 5,000, it could be something like 7,000. That even in Germany, sometimes we get different transition levels. If you do not have ATC, or if there is no instruction from ATC, I usually say, okay, we use a transition altitude. So 5,000. So if you don't know, put in 5,000. If ATC or the chart provides you with a distinct number, use that. What you see here, by the way, is the vertical path angle, as that's called. So this is the poor man's kind of vertical navigation, and it's mainly used to calculate the so-called top of descent. So what does this do? It's an angle. It says we have a 2.5 degrees descent angle. For example, in many of the ILSs, very often there's a so-called 3 degrees angle, okay, which just defines that at a certain speed. For example, here you can see this here. The ILS in Frankfurt has a 3.06 degrees angle. And that means that, for example, if you fly with 160 knots on the approach, you need at least 866 feet per minute descent rate, so that you are roughly on a 3 degrees descent angle. And this is the same principle here. They take an angle and then they look at the speed, and from the speed that you fly and the vertical descent or climb rate, but in this case it's the descent rate, they need to match so that you get the correct angle. And that's how the top of descent is calculated. Now, as far as I understand, it basically takes, I think it's 1,800 feet per minute on like jets. So when I'm in a jet, I usually start descending somewhere between 16 and 1,800 feet per minute, and then adjust it as I need it. Unfortunately, it will not show you the green banana, meaning the display that better systems show you where you can judge where you will end with your descent. So you can use some of these rule of thumb calculations to calculate when you have to start. This when thing, this is actually done by here, because when we go to the progress page, look, there's a top of descent, which is now in 203 miles. Okay, forget the times, that changes all the time, but it's the distance, and that's actually not too bad. So I've learned that the top of descent in the standard explain FMC is actually quite okay. Right, now let's have a quick look at the legs page, because what you will see now is, it has actually now calculated the Mach speed, Mach 0.706, and flight level 180, and you can use these values to set up in the mode control panel, or whatever the autopilot panel is called in the various aircraft, and make sure that you climb to flight level 180 as a cruise altitude, and that you use Mach 0.70 or something as a speed setting. Or you leave it, if the aircraft has the kind of VNAV capability, then you could have the autopilot and the autothrust do the speed here. Yeah, and then you can also see that sometime after Pilam, we have the top of descent. We cannot see it here, but you can see that we had flight level 180 on Pilam, and we have already a lower value on Kerax. That means somewhere between Pilam and Kerax, there's a top of descent, and you will start descending. This is a constraint. So at Metro, we must be on 5,000 feet or above. So don't go under 5,000 feet. The same is here. But more important, at red goal, we must be at 4,000. Not below, not above, but at 4,000. Okay, so this is an important constraint. I mean, we have the calculated altitude along the glide path. So if you use the autopilot, you should actually find yourself roughly at this altitude when you look here at the DME 7.1 readout here. You can see that here, 2,630. That should actually have worked out if you follow the glide slope correctly. Okay, and that's your flight plan in there. And we are almost done. So what we can do now is look at some of the other aspects. So let's assume we are in flight now, and ATC gives us a direct to. Okay, so there were several ways of defining a direct to. Let's use the first one. Let's assume that the magenta waypoint is the currently active waypoint. So it's flying towards that waypoint. This one cannot be changed by putting something on top of it. I will show you in a moment. So if the magenta waypoint needs to be changed for a direct to, for example, you go to the DIR intercept page, and let's assume that we should fly direct Lulul. I would select Lulul. I put it here, not here, but here. And then it will replace the magenta waypoint, the active waypoint, with the new one. Don't forget to execute. And now we are flying direct Lulul. It's down here. Let me see. Can I find the... so... not that we can see much more. Okay. PPOS, by the way, means present position, in case you wonder. The other possibility is if you know that you're going to skip a number of waypoints, one or more. For example, very often during an approach, the VOR in the center of the airport is part of the routing, but you got different instructions. So you actually want to skip a waypoint and directly put in the next one. The easiest way to do that, much easier than trying to delete things, is select it, put it on top, execute, done. What happens if you use the delete function is, one of these unfortunate little bugs that are still in this FMC implementation. Look at that. I use the delete key, I delete MAC. Not only have we got a discontinuity and a discon following that, but we lost a waypoint. Because BarRap was after MAC, but BarRap is gone. Bye bye BarRap. We actually overrode it with the discon thing. So this is now really, you need to go and try and repair your flight plan again by putting in, let me see, BarRap, because we deleted MAC. And we still have this discontinuity, so I need to go there, and after BarRap comes Galma. So I take Galma and I put it in here, and oof, we have repaired the flight plan, and we do it. And you have to do this every time you use the delete key. Don't try and just edit your flight plan by taking an existing waypoint and put it on top of the one that you want to get rid of. And that, by the way, also applies for the whole approach procedure and things like that. If you don't do that, you've seen what happens. Okay, next, we do have a fix page. What's the fix page doing? Well, very simple. You could actually define a reference point. For example, I could use Lulul. Lulul, so, Lulul. I put this here. And you see now, yeah, I don't know if you can really see it, but there's a little green thing that shows up on the display over Lulul. And now you have two possibilities. If you enter a radial RAD cross here, and then a distance, it will actually create a new waypoint, sort of a calculated waypoint with a certain heading and a certain distance from Lulul. And you can actually use this to have the autopilot fly there. I never use this, never. What I use this for is, very often you want distance circles around certain waypoints. For example, a 10 nautical mile circle, because you have, when you fly, let's say, a DME circle, and it's a 10 DME circle around a certain VOR with a distance measuring equipment. What you can do is now I can enter these 10 miles and put it in the disk cross without filling the RAD cross. And I think you can see this, yeah, on the display. Now I have a 10 nautical mile circle around the Lulul waypoint. I use this from time to time. In the default FMC with these crappy displays, it's only of limited use because it's very hard to read things and so on, but still it works. So it's great. Now the other thing that I want to show you is holds. This FMC, although it's not in the documentation, there is a FMC documentation for this one here from 2017. I haven't seen a newer one, and unfortunately the whole page that we are now on, hang on, or we wanted to go to, now we are on, the whole page isn't documented. Okay? So, in order to put in a hold in your existing flight plan, what you do is you check on the chart what is the waypoint for the hold. So we'll want to program this hold here. Okay, so it's Kerax. So what you can do is you can move forward to Kerax. You can also see that in plan mode you will see Kerax now in the center. You select Kerax and then the name is put in the so-called scratch pad. And now it's important, don't press any of these here, only use the left line select key 6, so the bottom one. If you press any of the others, this thing is all over the place. So now you're on the mod flight plan hold, whatever the second D is for. And you have Kerax as the fixed entry. Yep, that's the case here. That's the fixed entry. And now how to set up the heading. The way I do this is I look at, from that waypoint, how does the aircraft have to travel in order to follow the correct turn. In this case, it's right turns. And you can see this, all these holes on this chart are right turns. And I think right turns are very common, but not. There are also left turn circles. So, the next heading, that's the way I do it always, is from the waypoint, the next heading that I see following that line is 017. So I put in 017 and put it here. You cannot enter anything on the inbound Corsair. This seems to be a calculated only. It will not do anything. What it also has detected is that this is a northern facing holding pattern. And when you look at the chart, it's true. It goes up, so up means north, because these charts are all north oriented, up. Now it is possible that, not on this chart, I think, but, no, we don't. But it could also, you could also have a holding pattern facing south. It's possible. How do you do that? Well, it's still the same headings, but if I use the 197 instead of the 17, look, it says S for south. And if we would draw this, we would probably see right turns, so we would probably see 197, then 17. So it would go down here. Okay, that's where this southern holding pattern with a right turn would be. Now, because this is not correct for us, we'll put it back on the north. The 1.5 minutes, I'm not sure what the default holding length time is in Germany or anything else, so I'm not that experienced. 1.5 minutes sounds kind of okay, but just for us to check things out, what I can do is I can change this. So if you're in doubt and if you don't know, and if ATC often gives you actually fly the hold with 1 minute legs or 1 or 2 minute legs or something like that. If you get this information, you can enter it here. Let's assume we have a 1 minute leg time. Okay. What it will do is it will calculate the leg distance, and it will calculate the leg distance from the time and the speed. Very often in a hold you do have speed restrictions. So for example, if we are below 10,000, we have the general speed restriction of 250 knots, but very often, although not on this one here, but it could actually be that ATC gives you instructions such as fly flight level 80 by ATC or so. So if they have sent you down to flight level 80, we would be below 10,000, so we would have to change this to 50. See what happens when we do this. We now have 4.2 nautical miles because we're slower. We cannot fly as far as before because we have 1 minute legs, and with 250 or maybe even 220, because sometimes the speed is quite low. You see, now we have 3.7. Let's execute this, and then you see this thing here, which is the holding pattern. Again, I'm going to change the speed to 50. Execute. Don't forget to execute, and now you see it has gone a bit longer because we fly further when we are faster in our 1 minute legs. Now if you are en route and you are in the hold, what will happen is you will get something like an exit hold, I think it's called. I can't show you this here now because we are in the planning phase, we're not flying. In order to exit a hold that you're already in, use the exit hold function that should show up here. Otherwise, if you're on your way and you realize that you will not need that hold, so what we have done now is we have added the hold to the flight plan, and if we wouldn't do anything, when it comes to Kerax, it will automatically then go into the holding pattern. Now let's assume that the hold is off because for some reason we don't have to go into that hold. Don't do the delete thing. You can do it, but then you have to repair the flight plan again. No, just very simple. Take get, put it here, execute, done. Okay? That's the quickest way of getting rid of your hold, as long as you're not in it. Okay, and yeah, let's have a look quickly at some of the other pages. There's the NavRad page, so this is something where you can tune your radios and also set the courses instead of using the dials and knobs in the aircraft. It's okay. There are some also payware FMCs that have pages like this, like in the 747, where everything is done automatically. You can't even enter the ILS frequency in the 747. That's all done automatically by selecting an ILS approach. But you would check on something like the NavRad page, you would check that the frequency and the courses are correct and that it found it. Yeah, the progress page I've shown you. Yeah, I think that's it. We have covered all the important parts. I've showed you how to put in the flight plan, and that's about it, what you have with the standard explain FMC. With other ones like the Flight Factor aircraft or the TOLIS and so on, they have far more pages, and there's some more complexities that you will have to deal with, and we're going to go through them when we are dealing with one of these FMCs. So I hope that was helpful, and thanks very much for watching. Until next time.